And that is the role of the entrepreneur, to make the intangible tangible. You don't leave because you don't like what you're doing. You leave because of the pull. In the not easy, there's an opening to fear. And when you let fear through the door, you defeat yourself. What truly helps organizations to grow is what I call a full spectrum leader. And what is a full spectrum leader?
Wat maakt iemand echt succesvol? Is het meer dan cijfers en status? In deze podcastserie ontrafel ik het geheim achter dat succes. En hoe kunnen we deze geheimen toepassen in ons eigen leven? Geen maskers, maar echte verhalen die raken en inspireren. Richard Barrett is een in Groot-Brittannië geboren visionair die in stilte het bewustzijn van leiders en organisaties over de hele wereld heeft gevormd. Hij richtte het Barrett Value Center op en ontwikkelde het inmiddels iconische model van de 7 niveaus van bewustzijn. En vandaag, op zijn 80ste, ontwikkelt hij zich nog steeds. Zijn nieuwste werk, The New Entrepreneur, is een gedurfd en poëtisch manifest voor een nieuwe vorm van ondernemen. Dit is geen business as usual. Dit is ondernemen vanuit een totaal nieuwe missie. So, Richard, hello to you. Let's start with this idea of a new kind of entrepreneur. In your latest book, you speak about soul-aligned entrepreneurship. You describe a shift from building for profit to building from presence. What defines this shift for you, and what does it actually looks like in someone's day-to-day business?
I want to start with the word entrepreneur and its French origins. It means to undertake, or more precisely, to take between. And in that phrase, to take between, we have the essence of my approach, because what I'm taking between is between the intangible and the tangible. And that is the role of the entrepreneur, to make the intangible tangible. And so where is that intangible coming from? Well, it's coming from, I believe, deep inside. And so it's entrepreneurship in the sense of following a deep purpose that is unfolded within you and is pulsed through you.
Okay, but that kind of sensing inside, that could have different kinds of goals. It could be ambition, it could be financial, it could be for society.
Well, I'm not a big believer in goals. I'll tell you why. Because the moment you introduce goals, which are measurable, time-bound, you introduce the idea of stress. Because if I have a goal, then I need to achieve something by a certain date, and that changes the field, because now in the field is fear. Fear becomes part of the field because you set a goal. Now, I prefer to set a purpose or an intention. An intention. The word intention doesn't have that time-bound idea that a goal has. And so, I believe in setting an intention. Now, where does the intention come from? Well, from deep within.
Mm-hmm. Right. But if you set an intention, still, by the end, you have to get somewhere, I would say, if you want to have any kind of result. Do you mean to say, as a new entrepreneur, you set an intention and then you just go with the flow and see whatever comes out?
Not quite like that, but almost. You see, when somebody has an idea for a new business, shall we say, and something that the world needs, something that will improve society, that impulse generally comes from a need to self-express. Now, I haven't mentioned the soul so far. You did. I want to quickly say that the soul has 3 intentions. One, to self-express. Two, to connect with other people, and to make a difference. And three, to contribute. So that impulse to create, I believe, comes from inside. And that's why I mentioned at the beginning, the entrepreneur takes things from one side to the other, from the intangible to the tangible. Because where do your ideas come from? I know, Pernille, you have thought about this in your own life too, and
Definitely.
and so and you've been very successful in normal terms. However, when I see you smiling like that, I know you found joy. And finding joy is self expression. When you're able to self express, you find joy. And so, this whole thing about being an entrepreneur, moving from the intangible to the tangible, is a means of expressing your inner desires in a way that brings joy to your heart.
Okay. Okay. So far from the perspective of the entrepreneur. Of course, we'll dive into it further. But then let's look at the world that we are in as entrepreneurs, as human beings. You often speak of stewarding a new world. Can you take us into that phrase? What is the new world you sense is trying to emerge? And why is entrepreneurship such a key force in that transition?
Okay, so our present world is ruled by fear, quite frankly. And many entrepreneurs start down the path because they want to create an income because in order to survive. Nothing wrong with that. However, that is not the main reason for self expression. The main reason for self expression is to bring something, the gifts that you have, into the world so that the world can receive them and the world will improve. And so, creating a better world, I think, should be ultimately the goal of the entrepreneur. So, it what is this new world? Well, I've started recently a whole series of books. One of them is the new entrepreneur. We can talk about that later, but in a sense, we're talking about it now. But then there's the new leader, the new human, the new organization. And what I'm talking about when I say the new this, the new that, it's um, leaving behind the old idea, many of the old ideas, and moving to the new idea that actually we create through self expression and through resonance. Now, what is resonance? Everybody has a personality, and I call that in my new series of books a frequency of vibration, where you know when you're working with this person that this person is operating as, first of all, a self actualized individual and with authenticity. And you can feel it. You can feel integrity and authenticity. And that really is very important to the new entrepreneur, that sense of authenticity.
Yes, well, you actually have thrown in now many expressions and many
Yes.
words, and yes, I could imagine that our listeners are now wondering. Okay, I'm an essence, I'm a frequency, but actually, I just want to do my business, and I'm here for me, and not so much yet for a whole world. So, how would you say? Does that development go that you are slowly you start as an entrepreneur usually from a certain idea, of course, that comes from within. You set usually goals. We are all taught in marketing and in schools that you have to set goals, make a strategic plan, make a mission, and then by the end, when it gets to a certain success, you might start to evolve to get to service for society as well. And then we start to contribute from our company to well, a good goal, a certain organization that will help the rest of the world. And then we say we are good as entrepreneurs because we give money to the Red Cross or whatever. This seems to start at a whole different point. Could you?
Absolutely. It
Yes.
starts at the whole, because what you just described is the old academic approach to leadership, to entrepreneurship. I'm interested in building a new world, not repeating the mistakes of the old world, and creating joy through self-expression. And the entrepreneur is a creator. And to be a creator, you need to be in touch with the deepest aspect of who you are if you really want to create. So I'm nixing this whole idea of goals. I've
Mhm.
already said it once. I'm going to say it again. Set an intention, because you can't create when there's fear in your field. Okay,
Yeah.
you can't create when you've got anxiety about meeting goals. You could only create when you fully create, when you are at peace inside, and that you are aligned. Now, another new word, aligned. What does that mean? It means that you feel a sense of well-being inside, and you feel that what you are doing is purpose driven and comes from some sort of internal higher dimension that you
Hmm.
can't stop. It's like an impulse that you
Hmm.
can't stop. I know you felt that because I know you quite well. You felt this impulse, and
It's
that's what I'm
true.
talking about. Tell us about
It's
the
true.
impulse.
Well, it's true, and I recognize this path of story, Richard. I do. At the same time, I know that as soon as you get into fear or in fight, flight, or freeze, creativity stops. So, because your system is first of all taking care of you and how to save you. That can be a mental fear. It can be a fear outside for a car that's approaching too fast. But having said that, of course, in daily life, we do meet situations of fear, or we get blocked by competition, or things happen in our life that is internally triggering this fight, flight, or freeze. So, how would you say can you navigate as an entrepreneur if you need creativity, if you need to come from an intention? How can you navigate the moments of fear
Well,
so that you stay in your position of creation?
it's one simple word, Peniel, that overcomes all fear, and that is trust. You have to deeply trust the inspiration that is coming through you, because where is it coming from? The inspiration doesn't come from the ego. That's when you get into goals and setting goals. The inspiration comes from a much deeper place, which I call the soul. Now, what is the soul? The soul is that aspect of you that was with you when you were born and stays with you even beyond your death. Now, people get a little scared of the word soul. I'm totally not scared of the word soul. It's who I am. I often ask people, "Do you have a soul?" And they say yes, and I say, "No, you don't. You are the soul. You are that soul." And that's the place I'm coming from. I'm coming from a completely different place as a starting point when I look at the idea of entrepreneurship. I mean, I've been an entrepreneur. I am an entrepreneur. I feel these impulses all the time. In fact, sometimes the impulses from my soul overwhelm me. One thing after another, and I think, okay, I need to take a breather now from my impulses. And soul says, absolutely, of course you need to take a breather, otherwise you're going to get exhausted. So if you look back, as you know, about almost 3 years ago, I took a break from all of my business impulses and my writings, and I stopped everything, and I just decided to paint portraits. I like, bam, just like that, overnight. My wife was like, "Who are you? I don't recognize you." So I learned to paint portraits. Now that went on for 2.5 years or more, and then I saw you recently at my 80th birthday party, and from that moment, something happened. You remember I contributed a portrait of my best friend for 50 years and gave it to him. But from that moment until now what are we, 3 or 4 months later, I've done nothing but write. Now, I thought I wouldn't write again. I honestly thought I wouldn't write again. After 2.5 years of portrait painting, I thought, well, this is it. This is my future. Well, I'm going to continue portrait painting, but for the moment, in the last few months, I've written several books, and I can't stop it. And so I put my paintbrushes on the shelf over there, and I'll get back to it. But it's that impulse that I'm talking about. That impulse to create comes from within. If you don't follow that, you won't find joy. And actually, joy is the key. When you're
Okay.
having joy, you're doing what you should be doing.
Well, I hear you, and this path has continuously brought you also to a certain success, if I may say so. Definitely. The thing is just that wouldn't people be thinking also you saying this all? Well, that would mean that maybe one day I just leave my company just like that, with a snip of the fingers, and I'll turn into something else, leaving all my employees behind. I just cannot. Sometimes you also shouldn't you also sometimes have the discipline to continue certain processes because you're also responsible
Who are you responsible for?
for your employees, for the people around you that you give leadership to?
Well, so I've done what you just said. I mean, I've done it twice in my life. I let go of everything so I could create something new. Now, if you don't let go, how are you going to create space for something new to come in?
So it's necessary. It's a necessary thing.
Letting go is one of the toughest things. It's not easy. I worked at the World Bank as a transportation engineer for many years, and it was very successful. But I felt the call, the impulse to do something completely different. And
Mhm.
and I engineered my exit with 1 year's salary from the World Bank and started doing something that I had no experience in.
Oh,
I
okay,
wasn't
okay.
recognized
I'm
before.
sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just interrupting you right there. Apologies, Richard, because actually what you were just saying is I engineered my leaving. So
Yeah, I did.
what you're saying is actually that in the letting go, you do have a process of engineering in which you take certain responsibilities or a way out that the company that might be yours and that you want to leave will still be steered by someone else. You're not just turning your
Well,
back and leaving the door.
okay, well, let me interrupt you. I mean, leaving the World Bank, I was leaving it in good hands. I mean, I was one of 8,000 people, so I didn't have to worry about that. The World Bank would continue without me. However,
But I mean, in case that you are the leader and
well,
CEO
let
of
me
a
get it.
company.
I was, and the second time I did that was with the Barrett Values Centre. I started the Barrett Values Centre. I was CEO for 10 years. I worked for another 10 years, and then I just started something completely different. But I left the Barrett Values Centre in good hands, and I moved on. But I felt the impulse to move on. See, when you move on, you don't you don't leave because you don't like what you're doing. You leave because of the pull to something new. And that's what you have to remember. Do you feel the pull to something new? How about you,
Yeah.
Pernille? Do you feel the pull to something new?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And we're right in the midst of creating it with our business TV program, with this podcast, and
Okay,
yeah,
so
just
where
getting
does
into
that
it.
pull come from? Where does that pull come
Yeah,
from?
it definitely comes from my inside and from my soul,
Okay,
definitely. Yes, it
yeah.
is. We've actually, with the start of this company, we have set our intention. And if we would have conversations to see which partners would join in, and if they wouldn't, then we would just say, well, then that's obviously not the partner we are looking for. We'll just move forward and until we find those who will.
So
And we
you
did.
bring up another important point because as an entrepreneur, you can get started, but then you have to pull people in. And
Definitely.
you just illustrated one of my points in my book that the people you pull in, you must be able to resonate with them. And what does that mean? You have similar values, you have a similar sense of purpose. And if you just hire people because they're good at X, Y, or Z, these are not the people. You want people who will feel at home in what you're creating and want to create with you. So that's what I call frequency. That's what I call resonance. And
Mhm.
when and we used to call it culture. I used to call it culture myself, but it's actually resonance. It's an energetic expression of intention that
Mhm.
people must feel if they're going to support you in this endeavor. So what you're telling me is that you felt that.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is that what you're just mentioning actually already gets a step ahead into HR, human resource management, that actually hiring people. You should do then, as I sense from what you've just said, more from feeling that click, as we call it many times in normal language, click, you call it resonance, in energy where you feel that you can create and contribute to a company.
Yeah, and at a practical level, it's shared values.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you
Yeah,
stand for?
we actually also said it's nice maybe to take this as an example for people who are also listening, because it's not because I'm that important, but it's just close by. We've actually set our values for our intention, and we live up to them. So that means also that sometimes if an investor comes by with an enormous load of money, it could make our dreams come true. But when the click is not there, then we shouldn't do it. And we
No.
actually we have taken the big risk in our company to let go of one of our investors in advance of the project, because it just we felt it's not going nowhere. It's going to be only a program then by the end in which we are selling, and that was not our intention. It was to
So,
share, and it is to share entrepreneurial stories.
so you've exercised something called discernment. Discernment, which is another attribute of the new entrepreneur who is able to discern the difference between people who can really contribute through resonance and people who just want to jump on the bandwagon and make money. You see, you just illustrated my whole point here. I mean, you're moving down the path that I'm actually recommending that people move along.
But it's not easy, Richard. It's not easy,
Oh,
and it takes
who said it?
time.
Who said it was easy? But you
I
see,
agree.
there's a point. You see, in the not easy, there's an opening to fear, and when you let fear through the door, you defeat yourself. And so I come back to my word, trust. You have to trust in your intention in order to make it real. And who are you trusting? Well, you're trusting that voice from inside that is saying, this is the way, this is the purpose, this is the intention, and these are the values, and this is what we want to live by. You're trusting that and saying, no, I'm not going to let fear in. No, I'm not letting fear in. But there's a huge temptation to let
Of
fear in,
course.
especially if your ego gets involved. And the ego is all about self esteem. Look at me. I just created a $60 billion company. And wow, look at me. I've got a jet. And oh my God. Well, you have to
That,
forget
but
all of that.
that story, that picture that you're painting right now in words and not with your brushes, is actually what we see all the time on social media nowadays. Look
Yeah.
at me, look what I created, look how much money I have, and
Yeah.
there are of course many people who see that and who also feel entangled in a certain way to also do the same, because otherwise you obviously do not matter.
So, this is why I've created this whole series of books: The New Organization, The New Entrepreneur, The New Leader, The New Human, because I want us to move beyond these ego driven needs that are based on fear. and not having enough. I mean, basically, it's about not having enough. And now we enter into another whole new word, which is abundance. So, we want abundance, but what is abundance? Abundance isn't accumulation. Abundance is flow. When everything flows through you, the energy flows through you, money comes in, money goes out. I know I've been for 30 years now, I've been an entrepreneur, and I guess ultimately, if you want to look at the bottom line, it's cash flow. I mean, that's what you really have to focus on. But as long as you've got good cash flow, to mention something that most entrepreneurs are interested in, and of course they should be, if you set your intention right, your purpose right, and your values right, that usually takes care of itself, in my opinion, if you're on the right track. But if you let fear in, it begins to become difficult.
Mhm.
And there will be moments of struggle, and there will be moments of crisis. But again, come back, trust. Are we
Yeah,
doing the right thing?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Is what
yeah.
we're doing creating added value?
Well, of course, it is important in that whole journey to keep on checking in with your inner self, I would say, and see if you're still on that track that you actually have set intentionally, which actually moves me to the creation of the 7 levels of consciousness, because you've been mentioning now already in our conversation several times the importance of values, right? So
Right.
you've created that model over 25 years ago. It's a framework that helped thousands of leaders and organizations to become more aware of their values, their potential, their blind spots also. So, what have you learned since then about what truly helps people and organizations to grow?
What truly helps organizations to grow is what I call a full spectrum leader. And what is a full spectrum leader? A leader who is able to operate at all of the 7 levels of consciousness, which start in the ego domains of survival. Obviously, if you can't survive, how are you going to do anything? And then relationships, and then positive self esteem without having to lord it over other people because you feel that self esteem as self worth. You don't need to measure yourself against somebody else. You have a sense of self worth. And then comes the shift from those ego motivations, which are positive, because these ego motivations can become limiting. And this level 4 consciousness is what I call the transformation, the shift from focusing on what's in it for me to what's best for the common good. And you make that transition, generally speaking, in your 40s. Now, some people do it earlier, and that's great. These are, in a sense, more advanced people in terms of consciousness. And then you begin to question at that level 4, well, how do I operate? I'm operating on the beliefs of the culture in which I was raised and the parental programming. But that's not me. And that is a significant, because you change, because you become authentic. And you have to go through that authentic change, that level 4, in order to move to level 5, where you now know what your values are. Not forget beliefs. These are assumptions that we hold to be true, but they may not be true. Usually, because
You
they're
have
handed.
to you have to investigate those, right?
Yeah, but you have to. These are generally handed down, and you accept them because, as a child, you've got no other option. You have to fit in somehow, so you accept them. But you've got to get through that and say, well, who am I at the deepest level of my interior? What's important to me? And the values lead the way. And then the next step really is something I've been writing about recently is how do you feel when something comes up? Feelings are the pathway to the soul. I write in my book, Feeling Your Way to Enlightenment, because the intersection of who you are in the terms of ego and soul show up as feelings. When you're feeling joy, you're in alignment. When you're feeling fear, you're out of alignment. When you're feeling anxious, you're out of alignment. When you're feeling angry, you're out of alignment. So all of these feelings that you have, and again, feelings is not a word that we use in business language very much, but I think we should be, because it actually is the key to finding who you are and the level of resonance that lives within you. So what are your feelings? And then we move into this fifth stage, which I've mentioned already, is like, well, what is my purpose? What am I here to do? I've figured out what my values are, but what am I here to do? What's the impulse? Now, the impulse can change as you grow older, and it often does. My impulse in my 40s was to create, or 50s, was to create a measuring system to measure the intangibles by using values. And that's what I did. And now it's used all over the world. My intention now, as I'm much older, is to share what I've created with the world and keep on creating new things and sharing that with the world. And uh, so purpose, self-expression, and then comes making a difference, if you like, is the level 6. But you can't make a difference unless you can connect. And so as an entrepreneur, you really have to have high emotional intelligence. If you can't connect with people, how are you going to convince them of anything? You've got
Well,
to.
you might be an entrepreneur that connects just on the goal of making money. You could do that too.
Well, you could, but you probably will finish up. Well, I'm not going to. I'm not going to judge that. I'm just going to say, if that's the way you want to go, fine. It's not my way.
Right. Okay, let's
and
continue.
it's not your way either, because you just explained that is not your way, because you just
Yes.
turned down a big investor. Fine, okay, I agree with you. And so, to make a difference, you have to be able to connect, and but connect at an emotional level, at the level of. So when I meet you each time, I say, "Well, what's alive in you today, Pernille?
Mm-hmm.
What's making you tick today?" Uh, so I ask the question, what are you feeling? And people generally say, well, I feel fine. They're just avoiding the discussion about feelings, because feelings are the pathway to the soul. And so if you can engage people at that level. So, here I am living in Italy. I pop into the town every other morning for a coffee, and we sit there with our friends, and then new people arrive. The first question I ask them is, what brings you joy in your life? Now, this takes people by surprise, because
It does.
the first
It's quite
question,
something.
yeah, what brings you joy? And they go, that's a strange question, because nobody ever asked it before. But you know what? It opens the doorway. It immediately opens the doorway to the interior and to the feeling part of who you are. And that's how you build connection, not by, well, what do you do? Oh, well, I'm a banker. Oh, yeah, and I've done this, and no, I'm not interested. That really puts me off, quite frankly.
Mhm.
But what brings you joy? And generally speaking, there are two things that bring most people to. One is family, and two is self-expression. What is it that I really brings me joy when I lose track of time?
Mhm.
And so these things are really important to people,
Yeah,
because
so actually, yeah, with the questions that you bring up at just at the coffee on an Italian square, it's all about consciousness, right? To get more
correct.
consciously your inner being and where you are, and also to make it felt, which is an opening. I very much enjoy myself as well, as you know.
Yeah.
Now, if I look at on conscious leadership, huh? Richard, then you write, you are who you are is how you lead. So it can sound obvious, but it can also be very deeply confronting. So what does it take to truly lead from the inside out? And how do you start doing that then, as soon as you start to become conscious?
Well, I come back to what I said. to be able to operate at all 7 levels of consciousness at any particular moment, depending on what the need is. So if you've got a crisis at level 1, a survival crisis, you don't let the fear grab you. You say, okay, you remain calm inside and say, okay, I trust that we're going to move through this. And you spread the energy of calmness amongst the people who are in the organization. You don't want them to get fear. And as soon as they get into fear, everything starts to go wrong. So to be able to operate at that level where you become a role model, not just for your employees, but for your children and for society, that's when you become a true leader. Uh,
Yes.
up to that point, you're generally just speaking either a poor leader or a manager. There's nothing wrong with being a manager, but you want at some point to evolve to become a leader. And
Yes.
so,
Yes. Please continue.
no, I'm going to wait to give a little pause to speak your mind.
So I was just wondering, in you explaining this, if you could also give an example of what it means when a leader is the culture. What do you see when someone shapes culture energetically instead of with strategies and
Yeah.
slogans and ego?
Well, what you see is resonance because people love it. They love that leader who has this authenticity, who speaks the truth, who speaks with integrity, because everybody wants to be like that. And
Mm-hmm.
secretly, they want to be like this leader. And so that leader earns their respect. And that leader is always has a kind word to say, even when things are difficult. And also
Mm-hmm.
has a kind word to say when an employee is having difficulties at home or in life.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's that connection. It's that kindness connection that people love to see in a leader. And to become not the best in the world, but the best for the world.
So that actually would also ask, as I'm usually looking at it, and tell me how that resonates with you, Richard, that you become actually a party within yourself of observing your own system, of your feelings, of your fears, and trying to navigate those in difficult moments, and then also picking them up for your better self and the better world.
Correct. Professor Keegan, who used to be at the Harvard, who's now retired, had this model which I've modified slightly, but like the 4 stages, the unconscious mind, people just operate on reaction. And then he also calls it, I call it the unconscious mind, he calls it the socialized mind. And then we get into the self-actualizing mind, where you begin to feel like, wow, I can make something of my life. And this is a lot of entrepreneurs are born in this mind. However, there's still 2 more stages. And so after self actualizing, you reach what Maslow calls self realization, where in self actualization, you become the best that you can become in your outer world, right? It's like, and in the society where you live. And if you live in China, it'll be different to if you live in America or if you live in Holland or wherever you live. The best you can become within the framework of your existence. That's self actualization. But then Maslow took it a step deeper, and so did Carl Jung and a few other psycho, famous psychotherapists from the last century. Then comes self-realization. Now you become the best you can become internally instead of externally, and that's a huge shift because now I'm actually living my values. I'm operating with integrity. I've moved beyond self-actualization into self-realization, and that's where Keegan stopped. But I've added a new layer to that, and I call it the transcendent mind, where not only do you become the best version of yourself internally, you begin to realize that, and this is philosophically quite deep, that everybody who self-realizes gets to the point of understanding that they're an aspect of the one mind of the global energetic field that science tells us and quantum mechanics tells us we're all part of. And so now you become one with everybody. And this is a difficult stage to reach. But when you get to that point, there is no ego left. There's no sense of self. There's only a sense of oneness and contribution. That isn't to mean you operate, you live in a monastery miles from anywhere. No, you actually embody this sense of oneness in your day-to-day living.
Actually, what you are just mentioning is living according to certain more philosophical systems that we've all heard of, for example, in Qineng Qigong, where the exercises are influencing the whole energetic field, as you call it. And now, before you know, I think many people might be able to say, well, this is all blah, blah. This is too much of a hassle. It's not... with both feet on the ground, I need to know what to do, right? But let's just see this as a potential, right? As you are describing it. And I think many people would think also, okay, so you should adaptively change, adaptively have a kind of innovation. But how does one do that practically, especially in high stakes environments where there's pressure to decide. You have to deliver and you have to control. We go back to the first stages of your 7 levels model of consciousness, where fear and ego kick in. I mean, it's a demand also that many people get from their leaders. If you don't do so and so, then that and that.
And I would immediately leave that organization.
Then many people will have to leave the organizations. It's going to be a completely world disturbance factor.
Absolutely. It's going to be the Donald Trump of consciousness. Not sure he's going to get there, but still.
Well,
but look, many people, have burnout, and that's because they're reacting to what you just said. They're reacting to leaders who are low consciousness, who don't understand how to manifest in the world. They're operating out of fear. I don't want to operate out of fear.
No, exactly. But the thing is, before we get to that stage, a lot has to happen. I mean, of course, we can pick up this journey individually on whatever stage we are, but sometimes we also have our daily life to take care of course, with our family and children. As you were just saying, you become the best within the situation that you are. Still, though, my experience is also in times of need and not knowing that it does help, from my point of view, to still be the person that has the conversation with your inner setting, to see if even within financially things are needed, if you can still, what would I say, take the responsibility to your inner self in doing so. What do you say about that?
I agree. And so I didn't get to where I am in one fell swoop. It's taken me the last 30 years to get here. So
you're beautifully 80 years old now. So
right. So many of my books actually address these questions, and one in particular that is very popular is a book called "What My Soul Told Me," and it takes people from where they are in, as you described. Well, I'm self-actualized, but I'm still a little unconscious, but operating unconsciously. I mean, in other words, I react rather than respond, and it takes people from there into a deeper understanding of who they are. And that's, I think, why this book is so popular, is because of it leads people down this path.
Yes, it's on that particular topic.
Yeah, and I did the same thing with my book, The New Leadership Paradigm. I did the same thing with my book, The Values Driven Organization. Each of my books in the last 10 years or so, I've addressed people where they are and then showed them the way to move forward into a deeper understanding of themselves, of their organization, and of their leadership.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
Right
Yeah. Yeah.
now, right now, I'm taking that a whole step further, and that's why
Mhm.
I'm publishing the book, The New Leadership. Sorry, the New Entrepreneur and the New
Well,
Leader.
one of your boldest ideas is that business is a sacred vehicle for evolution. That's a
Yes,
powerful sentence. It's a powerful
it
sentence
is.
because what does that look like in hard choices? Hiring, scaling, pricing. Can the soul alignment and
Well,
financial viability truly coexist? Can it coexist?
of course it can. The 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 entrepreneur, the new entrepreneur, is birthing a new field of consciousness if it's truly operating from the soul level. And they are doing that by following their sense of purpose. And that sense of purpose, if it's coming from the soul, will be beneficial for the whole of society, beneficial for the planet, beneficial for universal consciousness. And
Mhm.
so the entrepreneur of the as a birther of a new society, I think is a wonderful idea and whose time has come. Because, you know, I think there are many people who are already entrepreneurs who feel this need to create a better world. I think there are, and, and, and so but they
There are
don't know how
many,
to,
many, yeah, there are many young entrepreneurs, the Gen Z entrepreneurs, that
right?
actually give birth to solutions, innovations for a better world. And many of them also say, I do not wish to work for an organization in which there's no I, there's no
Mm,
space for actually stepping into more talent driven
yeah.
and soul driven ways of contributing for society.
And these are the people I'm writing for now. I've done all my writing for getting people from self-actualization to self-realization. Now I'm talking about how do you embody this new way of being that gives you a sense of purpose and a sense of joy in your doing. Not
Mhm.
only in your doing, but at the same time, you learn a new way of being. So there's doing
Yes,
and there's being. And I always say, let the doing flow from the being. So who are you is the first step, the being. And then out of that sense of being flows the ideas for the doing.
right.
Um, right? So,
Well,
uh,
the thing is
it,
that I usually say there's the cross line. If you would say one is a vertical and another is a horizontal, then there's a crossing, and in that crossing there's the flow between doing and being, and you have to find that crossing point every time again to put yourself in that direction.
so when you let being, when the doing flow from the being, then the doing is not driven by fear. And if you let it be driven by fear, by
Right.
not trusting, you will have to face all sorts of challenges. Well, you may have to face challenges anyhow, because if you're a human
Mhm.
being, in one of my books, more recent books, I realized that if you're a human being, you're going to face adversity. I haven't met a single human being who has not faced adversity.
It belongs to life.
It does. And why is the question? Why? Because now I'm moving into a deep philosophical space. Because souls incarnate to learn how to live differently. And the way of learning that souls have chosen, I don't know why, but through adversity. How do you deal with adversity in your life? And some of my writings address that a particular question because
What would be one tip? What would be one tip that you could give on that?
well, my gosh, one tip. Were you limiting me to a whole just one
I
tip?
know, I
Well,
know, but we can't just have
okay,
all the books in here,
I've already mentioned one tip is don't let fear into your life
right?
because you know, and secondly is trust because who you are your soul. and the soul is decided in his lifetime to learn some lessons, and it's learning through adversity. So you have to trust that you can get through this lesson and this
Right.
adversity. And you don't turn to your best friend and say, "Oh gosh, I'm having a really difficult time." Well, your best friend is also having adversity. They don't really know, but deep
Mhm.
inside, because you've got this amazing intelligence within you of the soul that knows
Mhm.
how to do it. And so remember, you have to remember who you are and the principles, the energetic principles that allow you to overcome adversity. Now, the
And
greatest thing.
so, so, Richard, you actually state, and that follows as a logical next step from everything you've been talking about so far today. The state of the entrepreneur's consciousness defines the destiny of the business. So, can you
Totally.
give an example? Yeah, can you give an example where you saw this actually happen, where a shift in inner awareness changed the whole course of a business?
Well, now you're pinning me down. It's been in my life.
Well, you may take that as an example, of course. I mean,
Well, okay, so um, I go back to leaving the World Bank as a transportation engineer, and everything shifted. Everything in my life shifted because I now became not a transportation engineer, but a transformation engineer. And did I know how to do that at that time? No, I did not. But I just signed up and I said, I can't help myself. My friend said to me, "You're crazy. Here you are, another 10 years, you'll get a six-figure pension and you won't have to worry anymore." And I thought, yeah, right. I can't stop myself. You say the impulse is so strong that you can't. And if you try to stop, um, you will get depressed. When you deny the impulse that comes from inside, you feel the depression and you get constant reminders of moving into this new direction. Now, I did the same thing again when I left the Barrett Values Center and started the Barrett Academy for the Advancement of Human Values. I stopped focusing on cultural transformation, started focusing on deep personal transformation, which is what I've been doing for the last 6 or 7 years.
mhm.
So there's a here illustrates some points we've already mentioned. First of all, you have to learn to let go. I remember when I decided to stop being the CEO of the Barra Value Center, the next day I broke down and cried because it was hard to let go of something that you'd birthed. But I knew if I didn't let go, then I couldn't let come. I couldn't let what was wanting to come into my life. I couldn't let it in if there wasn't space for it.
Yeah, well, you
And
could actually copy paste this also to relationships, of course.
exactly. And it's true for relationships. I mean, sometimes if we want to talk about relationships, sometimes we outlive a relationship, and 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 there's no real blame. It's like, wow, we learned from each other, and now we've stopped learning from each other, and now we need to move on. Now, having that
Right.
conversation is not easy, but it is if you can
I know.
if you can embrace the truth, and some people can't, but if you can embrace the truth and say, okay, if this is in your best interest, and I'm going to trust it's in my best interest, and then you move into a whole new paradigm. Now, very often I have found that and it's true for many people, I believe, that the difficult experiences you had and the difficult challenges that you faced 2 years on, you say, wow, that was the best thing that happened to me.
That's true. Many times at the end, you see the connecting the dots, as I call it,
Right.
as being one of the most powerful moments that actually have helped you with difficulty to step into a next project thing to do. And many times it's unconscious in your younger years, and then by the end, as I feel it now, it becomes also a conscious process.
Yes, and it's at the core of the idea of the new entrepreneur, because when young people feel that pull inside to do something different, they have to leave something behind, and it can be extremely challenging, as you pointed out, because all sorts of survival fears arise, and that's where the
Mhm.
trust comes in. And
Yeah,
and, and so you right, okay, but you grow, you grow
yeah.
through those challenges. That's how you grow. Have you grown, Penel? I believe you have.
Well, that's actually that I crave for all my life. That I may be growing and finding myself every time again in a new stage. It's
Yeah.
not easy. It's not easy.
No.
Nobody said it would be easy. But it is the path that I want to walk. Otherwise, I would become very unhappy, and not just unhappy in a way of superficial, but deeply inside. So it's yeah. I can only agree with the phrase that you said. I can't stop myself. Sometimes it does give me a question mark, and I wonder. But will I be able to survive? Also, sometimes
Yeah, of
financially.
course. So
But
you
that's the way it is, right?
so you have to embrace these challenges with joy and with the
Hmm.
idea not
Yeah.
that this is a problem. This is an
Hmm.
opportunity to grow.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
joy, opportunity, thank you, gratitude for this opportunity to grow. Thank you for the opportunity to grow, you say to yourself or your soul.
So, Richard, there are, of course, many people in the world who are just not spiritual seekers, and there's no judgment in that, I find. But you have many people who are very strongly building or operating, or they're problem solvers. Where would you say can you start if they want to lead with more depth and alignment, or trying to find their way, but without losing the traction, the clients, the clarity?
Okay, so I want to object to the word spiritual seekers uh, because you see, I believe that these so-called spiritual seekers are just on a psychological development path. So I think we need to get rid of the idea of spiritual seekers and think about people as learning how to operate within themselves at a deep level of psychology. Because you see, 70 or 80 years ago, the soul was an integral part of psychology and psychotherapy. Carl Jung, even Maslow, and Roberto Assagioli in Italy, they all had a map of the mind which included the soul. And then what happened was the universities took out the soul because everything had to be repeatable experiment. And so you can't just repeat that. It has to be a lived experience. And so my mission, one of my big missions in life is to bring the soul back to psychology, and in so doing, place spirituality in a subservient role to psychological growth. So when we talk about spiritual seekers, I'm talking about people who want to grow psychologically speaking, because into those upper realms of my model, in the upper realms of Maslow's model, in the upper realms of everything that Carl Jung did, you encountered the soul. You couldn't avoid the soul. You couldn't avoid finding meaning and purpose. You couldn't avoid synchronistic experiences. You couldn't avoid that. And so that's all gone because our universities went down the rabbit hole of
But why
believing
did they
in
do that? Do you
behaviors.
think? Do you have any
Bec-
theory on that?
Absolutely, yeah, because you see, the universities are old paradigm thinking, and the way the universities work is that it's really self defeating. If you come up with a new idea, you have to have other people in universities to agree with your idea before it could go into the mainstream. And of course, most of the people who work in universities are not enlightened. in many ways, they're unconscious. I know I'm gonna get all sorts of letters now, but that's true.
You will
It's
definitely. You're quite giving some expressions here.
Yeah, no, the universities don't understand the deeper aspects of psychology, and then they say, "Oh, that's spiritual," so they stick it on it. Well, actually, it's psychology. It's not spiritual. It's spirituality is an aspect of psychology, and you'll see that in some of my recent books and my postings on LinkedIn. I talk about spirituality being an aspect of psychology, and that because when you take spirituality out of psychology, you take away the soul. And of course, the soul was in psychology 70 or 80 years ago. And so bringing the
Yes.
soul back to psychology eliminates the need for the word spiritual seeker. We all want to
And
grow.
this is obviously your way of contributing to the world and to society. But let's get back to the question then and take out the spiritual seekers. Also an expression that I'm not very fond of, but just to, well, it's nice because you gave a nice explanation now to how your view on that. But where can we start in general if we want to lead with more depth and alignment? Even when the fear kicks in, just can you give a
Yeah,
hands-on
hands on.
example?
Hands on.
Yes, yes.
All right. Don't deny the fear, welcome the fear and move into it and say, okay. And you can talk to yourself like this. You say, okay, Richard, I notice, or Pernille, I notice that you're actually angry or fearful. Why is that? What's going on with you that makes you feel this way? What is it what did you miss early in your life that has contributed to this conditioned reaction of fear? Because nearly all of our fears come from early conditioning, parental conditioning, and cultural conditioning. So the self inquiry is absolutely essential if you want to grow and develop. Not suppressing it, not denying it, but inquiring. Now, I'll give you an example. It must have been 15, 20 years ago now. Um, just gone through a divorce. I'd moved out of the house. I was living in a rented accommodation and I felt depressed. But I knew what that was. It's the sad depression is the sadness of the soul, basically. So every morning I would wake up depressed. I would just sit on the edge of my bed and I'd go, bring it on, bring it on, bring it on.
The depression, you mean?
Yeah, yeah, bring it on, bring it on. Because you see, I knew I couldn't get through it by denying it. The only way I could get through it was acknowledge it and then move past it. Because when you deny it, it stays there. It stays there forever if you deny it. But when you have these feelings, and like same with anger, it's like, well, okay, bring it on, express it, get it out of your system. Okay, I don't mean to say you've got to go around hurting people and bombing the nuclear sites or anything like that. No, I mean, it's like, yeah, bring it
You're
on.
welcoming it. You're
Yeah,
welcoming it in this. Huh?
yeah, exactly, because it's an aspect of who you are which has not been examined. And you're saying, oh, okay, here's part of me that I have not examined. Let me bring it on and understand it. And as you do that, it disintegrates almost before your eyes, not immediately, but over days and weeks, like it disintegrates. But when we deny it, it stays within our body. It stays in the energy field. And
Yeah.
so
It's
that's the
something that
best
we have
advice
learned
I
in
can.
society. Well, it's a very good
Yeah,
advice. I mean, it's something that we have learned in society also. People say, oh, just think positively. Oh, just get away from the
right.
pain, get away from the hurt. But to me, it makes no sense at all because it's not about positivity or negativity. It's about being in the center in between and trying with interest to find out where you are and why you are there,
Exactly.
and accepting that, and seeing how you also need your time to make the next step on your journey.
So I've spent the last 30 years of my life in this mode, exploring this deeper levels of consciousness. And
Did you have fun?
Yeah, yeah, it's exciting. It's
With all
exciting.
its difficulties and ups and downs, it's still exciting, right?
Yeah, but it's exciting because the insights bring you joy, and this
They do.
insights, the insights crystallize into wisdom,
They do. I
and
agree.
then
That's
you can
completely.
share that wisdom. This is what we're doing right now.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So I have a nice final question for you, Richard.
Oh,
I call it the billboard. So
all
let's
right.
say you get a billboard in our central station of the city Utrecht in the Netherlands.
Okay.
Everyone who's working, struggling, or waking up will see it. What message would you like to leave them with?
Embrace your fear because it's not who you are. You are never alone.
I love it. Thank you so much. I've truly enjoyed this ride. I could stay for much longer in these kind of conversations, but we will have them soon again as we are friends. But thank you so much.
You're more than welcome because it has been a great joy for me to spend more time with you.